I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we are talking to a remarkable woman who spent a quarter of a century living with the poorest of the poor in a very poor nation, the nation of Cambodia, a nation that survived a genocide attack by a brutal dictator and a brutal regime. Her name is Janne Ritskes, and we're delighted to have her here on Spotlight today. And we'd like to thank the folks at Good River Print and Media for helping us put Janne and her book, I Am Who I Am, My 25-Year Journey with the Poorest in Cambodia, putting them both in the spotlight today. Janne, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me, Logan.
Let's start out with a little background for the folks at home. Who was Pol Pot and what was the Khmer Rouge?
Well, it was during the time of when the philosophy of communism was such a big deal in the world. And Cambodia got caught up in the Vietnam War. So there was the secret bombing here in Cambodia. It did give rise to a group called the Khmer Rouge. Pol Pot thought he would be the ultimate communist. Basically, he believed that he had to bring the country down to ground zero, destroy everything and everyone, and then rebuild it according to communist ideology. In that process, he was very, very brutal, and a quarter of the population either died or left the country.
He was much like Mao Zedong, where he thought that the people from the city should go to the country, that they needed to be re-educated, and that everything had to be equal, and that political enemies should be disposed of. It was very similar and very brutal.
Yes, and people were seen as things rather than as human beings. So they were all dispensable. Life was cheap.
Exactly.
And it was also a regime that starvation was a norm. Don't treat the people as human beings. I think that's probably the most horrific thing. Everything was destroyed, all the systems, you're talking finance, education, medical care, everything was destroyed deliberately. And so, he really did want to bring the country down to ground zero. And he believed that if he destroyed everything, all the systems, everything that we're used to, then he could rebuild.
And this type of destruction obviously has repercussions even till today.
Yes. Well, it's current history. It's not ancient history. Right. So all of my staff are Khmer Rouge survivors. I haven't met anyone, Logan, who didn't lose 95% of their family members during this era. And that's something that, post-traumatic stress is very current. It not only impacts the survivors, it impacts their children because they're very fearful people and they pass the fear on to their children. So it's a country, it's coming out of the dark ages.
Yeah. How did you learn of this plight, and what about it motivated you to go and do more than send money, do more than to talk about it, but you actually went to live there and to help?
Well, I was a Vietnam War child, so I was a teenager when the Vietnam War was active. Also, you have to remember that was the beginning of television. And so we got, journalists weren't embedded yet. So we got a first-hand view of things, knew about Cambodia, knew what was happening here, watched the bombing, and knew that one day I would be here. About working with the poor, I've known that since I was a small child. It's a passion. It's who I am.
Now, were you raised with those kind of values? I mean, it almost sounds like you have like a missionary type background or a religious background that might push you in that direction.
Well, I think I grew up with immigrant parents who had gone through, 2 world wars, a depression, and you name it. They immigrated to Canada to, give us children a chance. passion to helping others was the norm. They're people of faith, and I'm a person of faith. And I think the mandate, our greatest mandate, is to love one another as I would have people love me, you know, kind of thing. So yeah, it was kind of the norm. People struggling, coming out of deep hurt, and rebuilding their lives, and not just for yourself, but for your neighbor. Anybody who needed help, you helped.
Tell me how old you were when you went over to Cambodia and what that was like.
I was 44 when I went. It was, you know, kind of step back. The country was destroyed. 95% of the people were in abject poverty. They lived in small thatched huts, 2 meters square, for people, families of 8 living in it. No water, no electricity, no anything.
And this is the 1990s now.
This is 1992 when I arrived. I started Tabitha in 94. Yeah, it was guns everywhere, a lot of insecurity, landmines everywhere. Streets weren't paved, you know. It was kind of like the Ukraine right now, what's happening there, that total destruction and total hurt.
What was the government like, and what is the government like now? It's still a communist country, I believe, right?
I would probably say socialist as opposed to communist. When I arrived, the political situation was pretty rough. We had warlords everywhere. Everybody wanted to be boss. Everybody had guns. To take a life costs you 5 cents. And if I don't like you, the way I look at you, well, just shoot them, you know, that kind of thing. A lot of political parties, a lot of words, a lot of insecurity. Streets were empty by 4 in the afternoon. The Khmer Rouge were still active. We were in the countryside. I mean, the country came to a standstill at 4 in the afternoon because they would come out, and they were not nice people. So yeah, now I think the Prime Minister has done an extraordinary job of rebuilding the country, providing security. This is something that the country didn't have for 40 years. Focusing on things like education, healthcare, you know, it's just he's a benevolent, loves his people, doesn't like the world at large, but he does love his people, and he does his best for them. And the change in the country is unbelievable. It's remarkable.
So you're going to a country that's completely destroyed, where there's lots of violence, where your life is in jeopardy, really, at the whim of some gunman. Where were you living? What was that situation like? And tell me how you got involved actually to start helping, because you probably had to take care of yourself first, right?
Well, yeah, you always have to do that.
Yeah.
I cashed in my pension, sold everything I had, and used that money to start. We rented an office. At the time, the United Nations was here, the peacekeepers, so rents were very inflated. So it was really hard to get a place. And so I lived in the office that we had. Part of the house had no walls, just screen netting. It had to be cheap. It was pretty neat. And then the first big rains, the whole building flooded, and it was horrible. So then, you know, we got another place. The first few years were tough, but I had good friends here, developed good friends who made sure I had food, which was nice. And yeah, it was good. You have to have wisdom, eh? You learn wisdom in a country like this. You learn to listen to the people a lot.
Right.
So you know where the problems are, you know.
What about language?
Neighbors?
Language. Like speaking with them in their native tongue, how were you able to communicate?
I still can't speak Cambodian. I can speak it a little.
Right.
What I've learned over the years is that if I speak their language, they don't listen to me.
Hmm.
But if I speak English, everybody has to focus.
Right.
And so the discussion starts of any new concept, because there's, Cambodia stopped in 62. The development of language stopped. The development of education stopped. So their language is back in the 60s, and we're living in the 90s, where the world has, evolves. It always evolves, changes. And so there was a lot of words like community development. There's no such word in Cambodia. Talking about savings, there's no such word.
Right.
So if I spoke English and they asked me what it meant, then the discussion started. And what I found is that people actually learn and think about and understand what we need to do much quicker than if I spoke Cambodian. Number one, I wouldn't have there's no words for these things.
Mhm.
So something like community development is a paragraph in Khmer,
Right.
So it's that kind of thing.
What,
Little secret.
what was your work before you arrived in Cambodia?
Well, I did the similar things in Kenya, East Africa, and I was in the Philippines for 8 years doing the same thing. And I worked in Skid Row while I was in college in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So all of those things taught me how to do the work, what not to do, how to see people, how to understand things. For example, I learned that pity gets you nowhere.
Yeah.
If you really want to help people, then you got to get them to make that choice and come up with systems that allow that choice to happen. So I can tell you what to do, Logan, but you still have to decide whether you're going to or not.
Right.
I have a system that says, okay, what would you like to do? And how would you like to do it? And I'll support that. That's a different thing.
Yeah.
You
can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink, as my mom used to like to say.
That's right. That's right.
Absolutely. Tell me a little bit about Tabitha and the formation of that.
Well, when I arrived here, like I said, everything was kind of in a bit of a turmoil. So go to the government. If you're going to work overseas, you must register. You must respect the government. You may not like it. That's a different issue. But you have to respect the rules of the land. So I went to register, and it was in flux. The whole thing was in flux at the time. And what they said to me was basically, Jan, you go out and you do the work. In a few years, when we're settled, I've learned a long time ago, Logan, that it's what you do that's important, not what you say. And so we were really fortunate, and I got good staff and very, very traumatized people, very frightened. Just getting them out of the office every day was a challenge. They had very clear expectations of the poor. They were all evil people, and that kind of thing. Changing those habits and making sure they understood they were poor too. So if you say they're evil, are you evil? That kind of thing. So yeah, it was I would say the first 5 years was a lot of work with post-traumatic stress, recognizing their own value, recognizing the value in others, and how do you bring out the best in people? And
what were your objectives when you went there? To get people clothed and fed, educated?
Yeah, but in a system that allowed them to be able to do that. So if I could say to you, you have problems, you would say, yeah. I would give you $100, right? And I'd say, now your problems are solved forever.
Right.
Now, you and I both know that's silly.
Yeah.
If I put in a system that allows them, number one, people are terrified. They're very frightened people. So you cannot build a system that incurs threat. So you have, if I give a loan, I have a threat, right? If you don't pay, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. So coming up with savings, number one, you have to decide it's your money. Are you worth it? And that was a very difficult thing. The number of tears people went through to make that decision was unbelievable. We had people who cried, just sob and sob and sob steadily for about 10 days. And every day we'd come and all we asked was, are you worth it? Are you worth this towel? Are you worth this cup? I mean, they're talking very simple things, right? And they're like us. There's something in their family that's an irritant that starts the day off wrong. And often it was simple little things like if I had a towel to dry myself off with, I would be rich. And okay, so how come you don't have it? And they would say, I don't have money. And I said, well, you got store-bought clothes. Yeah, secondhand clothes, of course, but still they're store-bought. He said, clearly you have some money. And they would say, yes, that's the thing, some. I have to tell you, they would say pennies a week, but that's all it costs for the towel, you see? Right. And then the day they would say, I'm worth it, is the day we started savings. It was the day, too, that their lives began to change. They were in charge, it was their money. The other issue was that we had to be trustworthy. They've coming out of a system that wasn't trustworthy. And the only guarantee was death if you don't do as we say, kind of thing. So we have their money. We're protecting it for them. But we also have to make sure we give it back, and putting that trust in us, that took a lot of courage on a lot of people's parts. And so at the end of 10 weeks, we give them the money and we give them 3 days. And we'd say, okay, now you got to buy that thing. We never bought anything for anyone. And we'll be back and we'll take a picture. And that's what we did. So in a lot of ways, we were cheerleaders. And it was only a couple of cycles when people started to buy things that would earn them an income. So they'd start with chickens. Love chickens. Chickens are the best thing in the world.
Yeah.
And
you're not going to starve if you have a chicken.
Well, it was not only that. Chickens multiply very quickly.
Right.
And they're good income, and they're good source of protein and things like that.
Yeah, that's what Bill Gates says. If he had to live in poverty, the one thing he'd want is a chicken, or probably a chicken and a rooster.
Would be nice.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing.
Yeah. And then, they combine that, what we did is it's a 10-week cycle. So people who cannot see the future, cannot plan for the future, that 10-week cycle started getting them to think, okay, every 10 weeks I can have the next thing. So they'd put the chickens with the savings, and then they'd put the pigs, chickens, and the savings. And I have to tell you, a large number of our families really started earning big income for here.
Right.
And that could purchase a lot from here because, food was cheap yet, and still is in many ways. It's changing. It's becoming more normal, but at that time, it was good.
Yeah, well, it's amazing the structure that you gave them to kind of empower their own lives. I think in education, they call it scaffolding, where you actually give them the structure to go out, to save, to buy, to become productive members of society, because so much has been unlearned and deprived from them that they don't know the basic things. Do you think you'll wind up living out the rest of your days in Cambodia?
No.
Nope.
No, it's time to pass it over to younger people. Cambodia has changed dramatically. Our first house building team, we had a fellow, Jonathan, who'd give me a hard time all the time, because things were pretty tough. They were building houses in the middle of a coup attempt. And I said, don't worry about it. You're not the target. And knowing the difference, that's very important. And he said, oh, Cambodia will never develop. I said, if they have security, watch it.
Hmm.
And that's what they've had. And if you see Cambodia now, you see Phnom Penh now, compared to what it was when I arrived, it looks like New York City.
Amazing.
Amazing. And
It's got to feel good to be part of that you came in when it was rubble and now you've been there through the rebuilding.
Yeah. Well, I think I've lived a really privileged life. I really have. It's been a tremendous, rewarding life. You know, we changed at least a quarter of the country. The government's very aware of it. The people are aware of it. It is nice to know that.
Yeah. Well,
You know,
a
it's
big
nice
ingredient is you're a brave person. I mean, that you leave the comfort of your
I
home.
don't know if I would use that word, but hey.
Well, you know what? A brave person doesn't think they're brave. And just because you're brave doesn't mean you don't have fear. You know,
That's right.
that's the thing. I mean, a brave person steps up even though they're scared to death.
Yeah.
So I think it's wonderful what you've done. Now, did you adopt a daughter as well?
I did.
Tell me about that.
Well, okay, so the United Nations was here. One of the gifts they left behind was AIDS. And AIDS is, it takes a couple of years before it takes a really big effect. So by 98, it was very prevalent. We had whole villages that we worked in where there was no survivors between 25 and 40. They'd all died of AIDS, and it was all new to Cambodia. It was a horrible thing. And poverty is something we don't understand, Logan.
Yeah.
People sold their children into the sex trade, but they sold them not because I'm greedy, but because there was some incident. Another child in the family would die without money to buy medicines, that kind of thing. And Miriam's mom was one of those. I also, we got stuck with an orphanage. And so we had placed children. And when we were finished, we worked with Mother Teresa's group, the Missionaries of Charity, and we had given them our leftover furniture. And they also asked that I would help them place other children. In that process, Miriam's mom came into their care, and she died giving birth. She actually had full-blown AIDS. Miriam was born at 7 months, so she was a kilo when I first saw her. And her mom bled to death. It took 11 days because people were scared of the disease, just like we're all kind of terrified of COVID right now, that kind of similarity.
I remember that era. It was, people were scared to death to shake hands, just like COVID, like you said. Yeah.
Yeah. And Miriam, at that morning that I first met her, the sisters had called me, Sister Lily, and she said, "Oh, Jan, I need parents for this little one." And walked into the orphanage, and there was this couple that I had brought along. And so Miriam's really tiny. I said to Sister Lillian, what's her problem? How did she come here? And she said, you know, about her mom died giving birth, had AIDS. And I said, what about Miriam? Is she positive? She said, I don't know. We don't have money to test her. So, and there was only the ELISA test, which is a very basic test for AIDS at the time. So we had her tested, and the next morning there was a choir from the local school singing Christmas carols to the kids. And they were singing Away in a Manger. And the prospective parents and us were there. And I said, the results came in for Miriam, and they were positive. And the parents looked at me and Lillian, and they said to us, oh, God would want us to have a perfect child. And I turned around, still a little embarrassed, not really, but I was really angry. And I turned around and I said, well, thankfully, God wants her to have perfect parents, and you're not it. You know, but to make a long story short, Miriam was HIV positive at the time. And of course, very few people will take a defiled child, so to speak. And Lillian said, we can't keep her. And at the same time, we were meeting at my house every Saturday morning with a number of people, Minister of Health, Minister of Women's Affairs, some of the Catholic priests. And we were talking about what we were going to do with the children with AIDS. It was hospices for adults, but not for children. And so I ended up taking Miriam. And so Miriam was at these meetings, right? She was just a baby. But as she was growing, changing and all that good stuff, our talk changed from talking about AIDS with a person attached to talking about a person who happened to have AIDS. And that changed how we thought about things. And the result was that there's half a dozen AIDS hospices for children were developed because of that. And Miriam is fine.
Wow.
She's my miracle child.
Oh, that's amazing. So she survived, and you were able to get the drugs for her that helped?
Well, my biggest problem with Miriam was she developed TB in the lungs and the lymph nodes, and it was that medicine. It was free as long as the doctor came every morning and made sure I gave her these meds, And we did that for 8 months, and Miriam never looked back after that. She's fine.
Amazing. How old is she now?
24.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So that is quite a Christmas miracle. The choir singing Away in the Manger. You've got this helpless baby in your hands that you feel is, possibly not going to make it. She's not being received the way you want her to be received. And then you take her into your own heart, into your own life. And I'm sure the rewards have been exponential.
Oh, yes. She's a wonderful person. I'm prejudiced, of course, but she's still a wonderful person.
Yeah.
Full of life and good with people. She's naturally compassionate, which, by the way, a lot of Cambodians are.
Yeah. Does she help you with your work there?
No. Well, she was raised as an international child, so she went to international schools, which again, I built one of them. And but she was raised with the staff. She knew about poverty and death and all this stuff long before we did. She started house building when she was 2, kept that up until she left. Had a summer program with the sisters, working with children who couldn't talk. She got them all to talk, that kind of thing.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So she's doing good in her own way, just like her mom. Tell me what it was like for you writing this book, revisiting these 25 years.
It was good. I think I lost some really good people that I really loved. I think that was the hardest part. The other thing I realized was when you write a book, you can't write negatives.
Right.
Publishers don't like negatives because, people don't like negatives. And I just thought, well, that's not reality either. So basically, I could probably write 10 books, but it was cathartic. It was good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So tell me where the road leads you to next.
Well, right now we're closing Tabitha. Our job here is done. So we're having a final build in January. We got 150 foreigners coming in, all friends of mine from all over the world. We're going to build 90 houses in the first week of January, and that's going to be our final act. And making sure all our staff and workers have enough money to start a business of their own. And that's worked out really, really well. Very thankful. But the hospital, Nokor, we still have that foundation. And our hospital is becoming the National Cancer Hospital of Cambodia, for which very, very grateful. It's something that was our vision in the beginning. And now becoming reality. It's a public hospital, which means everybody, including the poorest, can come and make sure that they have treatment. So part that, I'd like to teach. I'd like to teach others who'd like to try this kind of work, talk them through it a bit before they get there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll see.
I'd imagine one of the things you witnessed, and I've seen this with survivors from the Cultural Revolution in China, despite the poverty, despite the pain, despite the re-education in the jails and the death, there's such a hopeful resilience among the people who live through something like that.
They're survivors,
Yeah.
and life is precious, and a very, very strong desire to live life to the fullest. So, we're going to have a party. It's a party. If we're going to cry, it's really crying,
Right.
What I do find is that crying is your last resort,
Mm.
you know, and they're curious about everything. They missed out on education for 30 years. How does grass grow, Jan?
Right.
And all these kinds of things. That was a lot of fun. And how does corn grow? I don't know. I have to study that one, that kind of thing. So I learned a whole lot I didn't want to learn, but I did, you
Yeah.
know.
Well, that's
So
wonderful. It's a wonderful story. The name of the book is I Am Who I Am. And she's not quoting Popeye here, but it is called I Am Who I Am, My 25-Year Journey with the Poorest in Cambodia. It's a beautiful story of a woman who has led a beautiful life. Her name is Janne Ritskes, and I highly recommend this book. It will inspire you perhaps to help others. I think during the Christmas season, this is a message that should go forth as well as every day. Dickens would remind us, not just on Christmas Day. Janne, thank you so much for joining us here today.
thank you for having me.
My pleasure, a real honor. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time on Spotlight.